Following show may shock, disturb, and offend some viewers. The opinions, theories, and facts shared on this podcast are not widely accepted by the brainwashed masses, especially those who find dark humor offensive. Viewer discretion is advised.
Jeffrey Dahmer soaked in blood. The Unabomber blowing up. Waco, Texas, and Heaven's Gates. Aliens modified, meant for mapes. JFK shot in the head by the CIA. Bigfoot and the Mothman. Son of Sam talking to dogs again. Witches, ghosts, and goblins. Mysterious noise and hauntings. Dark arts and the skull and bones. Most celebrities are probably cloned. So if you're feeling all alone, crack a beer and get stoned. I welcome you to the podcast Strange Brew. We're here to entertain you. We're here to entertain you.
It's about to get strange.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. Welcome back. I'm one of your hosts, Tomcat, aka Tom Thompson, the Reptilian. You can find all my music on all music platforms. I'm excited for the show. I have a brand new guest here, Simon. We were on an episode together for Reality Czars, kind of talking about Canadian nationalism and the problems that Canada is facing. We are both Canadian. We just found out that we're not really far apart. So for the audience that is not aware of you, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Simon Esler. I am a content creator, filmmaker. I'm an actor. I've been sort of freedom fighter and so-called conspiracy theorist for a long time now, maybe over a decade. It's been a while. I actually got brought into the whole alternative media space and challenging authority and questioning government and all that pretty early because I actually grew up as an experiencer. So I had encounters with UFOs and all sorts of things when I was very young. And so I was naturally moved in that direction to become a free thinker and was kind of pushing the limits a lot growing up. And so I have since continued to build upon my initial experiences in alternative media and started to get out there on my own. I am a filmmaker with a couple of films out there. You can see my full-length documentary, Cut, Daughters of the West, and that gets into the ways that our culture and certain forms of social engineering are destroying young women in the Western world. And I have a short film called Canada's Red Shadow that is about the influence of communism in Canada. And you can also check out my Superorganism 6-part docuseries, and that is about the war on the family. So
that's awesome, dude.
Yeah.
Literally, I'm probably gonna have you back on the show because all of those things individually we could talk about for an hour, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's pretty, because I've noticed, right? I've always been aware of the overreach of the government and never been a fan. I think the government should be the least involved in your life as possible. Yeah. But it wasn't until maybe like was aware of communism, but maybe like 3-4 years ago when I really started to pay attention to it, research it, look into it, and then you discover this history that they're not kind of telling you. All of that actually sounds really interesting. But because we are Strange Brew, I want you to tell me about your experiences with like UFOs, any, because I've messed around with the Ouija boards. The fans know this. I've had shadow people experiences. I've seen weird UFOs and just weird things in life. So I would love to hear if you have any stories and experiences of your own that the audience would you think would like and be interested in.
Yeah, I mean, God, there's so many. One of the earliest ones was when I was up in Muskoka at a family cottage when I was about 10 years old, and I was laying in the snow by myself on the dock by the lake. And this was one of those nights when the sky was particularly clear. In that area of the world, when there's no moon, you see the whole Milky Way galaxy. Yeah. I mean, it's just incredible. So, I mean, I was laying there by myself in the snow and I saw a purple spiral open up in the sky and rotate for about 40 minutes. And this was a little bit bigger than the moon, to be honest.
Whoa, no way, really?
It was big. It was very big. Now, at the time, 10 years old, I really didn't have any kind of conspiratorial inklings. In fact, I don't recall even telling anyone about it. It was just kind of a cool experience that I had. And I think at the time I just left it alone, and then I reflected on it a lot more years later. But then, there was a ton more of experiences, lots more.
You're like, oh, that's weird. Especially at that age, you'd be like, weird. And then you just kind of like, especially at that, you would be like, whatever.
Yeah, that's right. And then later I'm like, holy shit, wait a minute. I saw a purple spiral open up in the fucking sky.
That's so crazy. And you see this stuff now where like people are like, I don't know if that's real or whatever, but in the UK, there was recently an event where there was this weird white spiral like thing open up in the sky, and it was filmed at multiple different locations. So
yeah, they've shown up in Russia and a bunch. I've been watching over the years how this has shown up in a lot of places. Now, I don't know what it is. I know that there is some possibility that some of it is a particular rocket technology, but I don't think that explains all of them, frankly. And this was built upon over the years. So at the same place in Muskoka, I would end up seeing lots of things over the years. One of the other things I saw was what at first looks like a shooting star, but then they would make 90-degree turns. So,
weird.
of course, that has to be some kind of craft or
Yeah.
something, because obviously a shooting star can never do anything like that. But then it pulls you deeper into the rabbit hole, because if there's any kind of craft that can make a 90-degree turn when it's moving at those kind of speeds, well, if it's a normal craft, it's going to snap the neck of the pilot or whoever is inside there, unless these craft have some kind of gravitational field of their own. And so I got pulled into all of that, into anti-gravity research, zero-point energy research. I ended up even trying to push some of that when I was in university. I wrote a paper on it because I was following the physicists who were talking about the technology and the science behind some of this alleged anti-gravity craft. And I had the assistant, the teaching assistant at the university, get upset with me because they said I wasn't using real physicists, even though, of course, I was. But at the time, it was really interesting to me to sort of push this in these mainstream institutions and watch for what's going on. So I saw a lot of craft like this. I even saw some of this in Toronto. I saw, again, what looks initially like shooting stars, but they would then start crisscrossing as if it was like fighter pilots like messing around with each other, or they're in a battle or something. It doesn't make any sense in terms of what we're told is out there, in a mainstream sense. So I've seen a lot of craft.
Yeah, and that's weird too, because like I've always been on the fence of like I've always loved aliens and this idea of aliens. That's what after the Ouija board and my paranormal experiences, of like being interested in what lies beyond the physical world. Even when I was like very young, like grade 7, when we'd be messing around with the Ouija board and stuff like that. But I've always been like, especially as I got older, I was like, oh, I always believed that aliens existed, and maybe that they're interdimensional beings that are corresponding with our planet somehow. But the older I get, the more skeptical I get, and the more I'm like, not skeptical in a way where I dismiss it, but in a way of like, maybe it's the government. Like, I think that there's the metallic crafts that we've seen since like whatever the 40s and 50s that most likely are military crafts that they were working on. We know what the Nazis were doing some of this stuff, but I do think that there is also stuff that they don't even want to tell us. First of all, that they have, and second of all, that they've seen.
100%. This has actually been confirmed to an extent. So there's a scientist named Salvatore Pais, or Pais, I can't remember the pronunciation of his name, but he disclosed, he put out the blueprints, the patents were put out, everything, that the Navy, the US Navy, has anti-gravity craft. They have craft that are capable of producing like energy shields, of producing cloaking, and of producing free energy technology, basically.
Hiding the cell from us.
So this was released. This is what kind of blows my mind. And I think this has a lot to do with the way that the Overton window, like what we're allowed to talk about, is really carefully managed. Because you'll see, the US government will trot out like whistleblowers about UFOs, and they'll talk about like a tic tac in the sky and this crusty video. All of that to me is limited hangout, controlled disclosures. All of that stuff is very tightly managed operations. And the way I know that is because no one is addressing what was released by the Navy. The Navy confirmed that some of these blueprints, some of these technologies released by Salvatore Pais are operational, which means the Navy has operational anti-gravity craft, operational, capability to cloak themselves, to do all of these incredible things, to use free energy technology. So, to me, I've come a long way in the experiences I've had, but then I'm sort of like you, like I hold a much more skeptical view of a lot of it now. I think the majority of what people are seeing in the skies is human. I think there's maybe a small amount that's extraterrestrial. I think it's very likely that there was some reverse engineering of crashed craft. I think that's
I agree.
a high possibility. But we're at a point in time where I think it's a difficult thing to unleash something like free energy technology into the world without causing just an absolute collapse of our systems. I think to an extent, it has to be released in a way that's more stable. For example, just a small basic example, you need to have like a strong middle working class to be able to implement an entirely new energy infrastructure. So if you were to release this kind of ultra disruptive technology in a nation that is demoralized with a crippled middle class, I mean, to
Canada.
me, it's yeah, exactly. It's just not going
Yeah.
to work. And Canada's tied up in a lot of this too, right? Like you have the Shag Harbor UFO incident,
We talked about
right?
that. Yeah.
I mean, that's the most documented UFO event in history. And the whole thing, it occurs in Canada to the extent that there was the Navy divers who even said they saw extraterrestrials fixing their craft in the bottom of the ocean.
Which is wild. That's why I think they're hiding out, because who's going down there?
Yeah, exactly. Oh, I think so too. I think a big possibility there. But then what's
Yeah.
crazy to me, and this is very interesting considering the current relationship between Canada and America, that whole Shag Harbor event, the whole thing was passed off to the US military and they took full
Weird,
control,
yeah.
right?
Of course.
So there's a kind of dominance that the US military has always had over what we're doing here in Canada, to the extent that they can take over an operation of a crashed UFO in Canada and say, we fully control this now.
And why would they want to give us this technology when it seems obviously that they want to have more control over the mass population? And that's why I think, like, I truly believe that's part of the reason why they're doing the open the borders. It's interesting, right? We have COVID. And then people took a medical experiment, you know, I gotta watch it on YouTube, but they did a medical experiment. The population is declining, but instead of trying to incentivize Canadians to have kids, because in the 80s they told them, oh, we're overpopulated, there's too many people after the baby boomers, all this stuff, right? And then they don't want to actually incentivize us to have children. They will put all that money into bringing refugees and migrants over here that don't actually benefit to the country, and then they collapse it from within, and then everyone's brought to their knees, and they're like, here's this digital currency and this digital ID where you don't have to work, but AI is going to do it all for you. And then you're just essentially mindless slaves, like some Wally World shit. And you know what I mean? That it seems like they wouldn't want to give us the technology, even if they had it, even if it could change the world, like people like Elon Musk and some of these other people, they could change the world in a day, a week, a month, by implementing certain policies and using their money and their wealth for something actually good, not trying to dominate over and enslave humanity because of their own like narcissistic ego. And you see that now more than ever.
You know, there was I'm trying to remember who said this. It was, I think, the son of one of the big defense contractors. I'm not going to remember his name now. Anyways, he was giving a presentation. It was like Boeing or one of the big developers that works with these big military contracts. And he was doing a presentation once, and he said something along the lines of, we now have the technology to take ET home. You know, very, very open about it. And then there's another quote. I can't remember if it's the same guy or not. It's been a while since I've gone through all this research, but the essential sentiment was it would take an act of God to get this technology out of these classified programs. And I think a lot of it is what you're talking about. I think it represents the decentralization of energy infrastructure, which of course we know that the people that we're struggling against, right? So you have this group of sort of globalist, you know, satanic Luciferian globalist group that is literally intent on trying to reorganize power in the world towards global governance. And so for them, anything that is decentralization of power, they're against. So for example, you know, you have Mark Carney, right? Mark Carney's a good example of this. So Mark Carney is really against crypto because he believes that the world needs central bankers. And he believes
he's a banker and he made tons of money off of doing
that. He believes he's very important, of course, right? Yeah. And so his whole stance on crypto is that basically crypto is, you know, it's kind of just like there's some innovation, but it's just kind of like a fit that the lower classes threw from the financial crisis in, like, you know, 2008 or whatever it was. He believes it was just like a fit that was being thrown by the people sort of beneath him, and that in the end, they're going to realize they actually need central bankers because it stabilizes things. So people like him, they believe deeply in centralized control and, you know, centralized control over things like energy infrastructure, but also things like morality. So I think what we're looking at in terms of the UFO issue is the aggressive classification of these kinds of technologies. I think it's more about hiding the technologies than it is hiding extraterrestrials.
Yeah, I agree.
In my opinion, one of the major reasons they've invested so much in psychological operations and cover-ups and all this stuff is really to make sure the technology never comes out. I don't think they care that much about the extraterrestrial element of it coming out.
And I think they're not supposed to be like, there's that karmatic rule where they're not supposed to mess with like an evolving civilization. And even if there is like benevolent ET out there, or interdimensional beings that are just in another dimension, they see the problems that we're having. Because I believe, like, I've always thought that like Earth is like a school, right? We're here to learn lessons so we can ascend to hopefully a higher level of being, but like they can't mess with us. But then I think that I've always thought there's also darker entities that may be breaking those karmatic rules, but doing it in a way where it's allowed almost, and they're able to like influence us and manipulate us. Like there's that theory about like where some of these aliens, like, we're able to like take our thoughts and draw it on a piece of paper. Now, things like what they would quote the reptilians and some of these darker entities are able to do is they can't actually take an image from their brain and draw it. They have to manipulate it. So they can take something that we've done, built, drawn, created, and then manipulate it to their own will and bend it in their will. And that's what you see with some of these oligarchs and people like, Mark Carney and stuff like that. Like you can see he's subverted into the agenda of kind of what I want to touch upon is this subversion of communism and stuff like that. Is his daughter's trans and his wife looks like a man.
Yeah. Yep. That's right. He's deeply influenced by this. So Carney to me represents someone who's less sort of evil and psychopathic and more someone who's totally ideologically captured. I was reading some of his book, Values. And it's kind of scary to me in the sense that someone who really believes in this stuff will take it really, really far in a way that I think is kind of frightening. I mean, I would argue that it's frightening what he's done to his child.
Yeah.
But I really think that he represents like a leader who's deeply ideologically captured, which is, this whole process of subverting someone into a communist form of cognition. And this whole process of ideologically subverting Canada, I got to say, it's been pretty expertly done because our nation as a whole has no idea that this process has occurred.
No, I think I got crazy Antifa. It's like,
yeah, they don't understand. And so that's one of the frustrating things for me watching the national dialogue and Canadian politics and all this is that the conversations being had are themselves inside of a prefabricated battle space that is meant to be totally disassociated from the real issues. So I don't really see a political struggle.
No.
I see a group of ideologically captured people struggling to defend their own capture. Yeah, a lot.
Even Pierre, all of them, they all like they're not even because like for all the fans of this will probably come out after the election. God knows what direction it's actually going to go. No But Pierre, during these elections, like I'm not a fan of the government, right? I think all politicians are parasites. I think that thinking that we can't survive without the government is like thinking animals can't survive without a farm. Like I always love that statement. But like they're not on these debates, and I'm barely watching them because I could care less because it means nothing to me. If the voting mattered, they wouldn't let us do it, as Mark Twain I think said. They quote that towards him. But like they're not talking about like what happened with the medicine time and how it hasn't unalived people, made them sick. They're not talking about mass immigration. They're not talking about like any of the issues that Canadians actually care about. And they're not talking about COVID and how people were treated during the convoy, like real issues that affected people. And the fact that I've always said, it's just so interesting to me the way that Canadians, especially, and I know there's only really a quarter of this country that are actually legitimately Canadian, founding stock Canadians. Like my family's been here since 1604 on one side and 1700 on the other, right? So like there's only a quarter of us really, to maybe a little more than half, if I'm stretching, and they're very complacent that like someone like Justin Trudeau can literally pretty much collapse the country, flooded millions of people, destroy people's lives with his policies, affected so many people, has blood in his hands, all the scandals that he went through and did to the Canadian people, stole money from us, and then he just gets to walk away. And until there's like accountability for these people, there is no political solution, because someone like him is like, oh, look at me. I'm a normal boy now. I'm at the grocery store, and he's ruined this entire country. And then people just forget because they're like, oh, psychological warfare. Here's Mark Carney. Like this guy is a different face on this same puppeted system, right? It's so crazy that people are like, and Justin Trudeau will walk away with millions, probably billions of dollars of our money, and nobody's doing anything about it. And he probably will never be held accountable.
I know it's painful to watch him walk away and live like a king. And I think this psychology of the sort of Canadian identity is it's a really, really tricky issue, because I think we have been a nation founded on certain things that are now turning against us. You know, for example, you know, back during the formation of the United States, we were, of course, invited to come join the revolution and to rise up against British rule. But the overwhelming sort of sensibility of the people at the time was we'd rather be ruled.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we didn't choose to rise up. We didn't join the America. At the time, it wasn't America. It was let's fucking fight the British and free ourselves. And there were, you know, British, some of the founders of America came up to Canada and tried to pitch it to Canadians at the time. And they had a hard time getting people to grasp the idea of what they were pitching, what this revolution was, what it represented. So we do have this fork in the road between Canada and America, where at the time, you know, there was a choice to stay being ruled. And I think to an extent, some of that psychology still reigns true today. It's I think,
yeah, I'm sure too. And I kind of like that we have the British roots to some extent. Like I always bring up the ensign flag. I have it in my backyard of like showing like, hey, this is who the Canadian people are, because that no one can define what a Canadian is. And it's like the founding stock of Europeans, the English, French, Irish, and Scottish, and other Europeans that blended together and made what we now know as a Canadian. Because people are like, it's not you don't have a national identity. You don't have an ethnic makeup of what makes us Canadian. And I'm like, we do though. Hence we don't have accents. And there's places in Canada that have like Newfoundland, they have accents of their own because they developed it over generations or whatever, right? We don't speak like, I don't have a British accent or an Irish accent anymore, like maybe at the beginning, but like it's interesting because the Canadians at that time probably valued that whole idea of the British Empire and probably felt like this was a good thing, that like they were a conquering empire and we still want to stay a part of that. Like on my dad's side of my family, we were empire loyalists in the 1700s. So like, it's interesting that some people held on to that and was like, I want to still be part of this empire. And you can see how like that was a good and probably very bad thing, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you, because at the time, I want to say it was Benjamin Franklin. I just recently watched an episode on this. Anyways, I can't remember which. There was a large American influencer at the time who came up here, and it wasn't really, the sentiment wasn't really that people were against it. It just didn't really catch fire. Like it didn't really make sense at the time. And I think there might be some of what you're talking about there, that there's this, at the time there was, you know, a drive to have an actual identity. And since then, you know, Trudeau has talked about this, that there's no core. He literally said there's no core identity, that Canada is the first post-nationalist state.
Yeah, which is not true in my opinion.
It's bullshit. No, I agree. I think what he's
a Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian. Then what is it, man? If I go, like I've always loved analogies like this. If I go to Japan and I have a kid on Japanese soil, my kid doesn't turn Japanese. If I go to India, the same thing. That's why they can't show up here, especially people from India, because they're being flooded in here because there's billions of them. They come from, their culture is not even close to compatible with ours in any way. The way they think, the way they act, and they've done tests on this, that there is differences between us. There are brains, literally Asian people, their brain chemistry is totally different than a European, and like it's crazy. And that this idea is Marxism, right? And communism, so that we're all the same. And that's what's interesting about things that Mark Carney and liberals, like because they're communists, preach and try to propose, is this idea of equity, where we're going to take money from people who have paid into their like property for decades and maybe paid off their mortgages, but we want some of that. We want to tax you more because other people have it bad and they need your tax money. Well, they're not working towards anything. And the fact that like they give refugees more money a month than they give seniors that have paid into the system for like literally decades and decades. And that's why it pisses me off when people from other countries come here and then they give them subsidy wages, and essentially we're catering and paying for people to replace us and destroy the country from within and replace our children. Like, I don't want my kids to grow up and be a minority in the country that their ancestors built, like sacrificed, struggled, and endured numerous things that people today couldn't imagine, so they could be here today.
You know, there's a really high level of social engineering going on here, you know, from the groups like the World Economic Forum. Okay. So when they get together in Davos, the framing they give these mass immigrations flooding places like Canada. The framing they give it is there's problems, with job labor, like the labor market needs help. We got to bring people in because we need the labor. Like they give it this really lame, benign narrative, and they don't address any of what you're talking about, that there's the completely different ways in our brain function. The cognition of someone from the East is completely different from the cognition of someone in the West. This is, like you said, this is a well studied thing. And if you flip it around, we would never be allowed to go and flood China and make China mostly white. We could never flood India and make India mostly white. That would never fly.
They tried that,
right?
Like they tried to take over, and they fought back. But to be fair, like a 200 to 300,000 troops, British troops held down most of India for like ever, and they did like nothing really.
Yeah, I think we're looking at it now through this like modern lens, and they want to put all these really soft narratives over all of this. But to me, there is, within these groups, I think some of the people in Davos and the World Economic Forum, I think some of these people are genuine intellectuals who believe in what they're talking about. But there is within those groups actual psychopaths, in my opinion, genuine like sociopathic people who are potentially satanic in their orientation of the world. And I'm not talking about the benign, like left-wing Satanism. I'm talking about a kind of Satanism that is genuinely fascinated with the suffering of others, the suffering of the innocent, for the sake of the suffering of the innocent, right? Like that's the orientation that I'm speaking to be very specific. So for them, there is a deep understanding of the kind of tensions it causes when you flood a country, with like 1 million people from India. They're well aware that this is going to create a rise in racial tension. Now, because they're social engineers and because they're seeking to, in this very psychopathic way, reorder power in the world, they want to cause that racial tension. And then they want to use that to say, look at the people resisting, how racist they are. And the whole idea is to build up racial tension and then use these new neo-Marxist narratives that they've been building over the years, and embedding into countries like Canada, embedding right into our legal systems, to then undermine the rights of the people that are living here. So a good example, you brought up equity earlier. So if you look at the trajectory of Canadian law, I've been studying this a lot recently. You have words like equality. Okay, so equality in Canadian law used to mean equal treatment under the law. That was the original meaning. Now, if you look at the way that the word equality is used in Canadian law and Canadian like human rights law and things like this now, it actually is just being interpreted as equity. They haven't changed the word, but they've changed the meaning. So words like this, through the sort of neo-Marxist ideological
stuff,
all of these things, what they've done is by changing our culture and inserting these neo-Marxist narratives, so identity politics and all of that, by putting identity politics into everything, they've changed our culture so that the words in for example, our human rights laws, the words mean new things, even though it's the same words from when we originally created those laws. So when you go, you have a law that says equality, it doesn't mean that anymore. It more means equity. It more ties into the whole idea. That's why in Canada, it's a human right to have your gender expression and gender identity, protected. They changed the human rights laws in 2017 to include gender identity and gender expression.
Which used to be a mental illness. Like it literally was classified as like we watched a movie last night, and it was like an early 2000s movie. And they like made a joke about how, like the cross-dressing trannies, and like it used to be like a mental illness where people would be like, what the hell is going on over there? Right. 100%. And it is, I wanted to make the point that because the more that I've always stated, the more that you bring in people of different ideologies and different religions, it's only going to cause more and more division. It's not like this idea that like diversity is our strength is the biggest lie we've ever been sold. How is in the world do differences make people stronger? No, homogeneity does. People sharing the same like ideas and genetics and stuff like that. And like people deserve their own homes, right? If people want to come to a country and they like, I've said this before, right? If I really like Japanese culture and I was fascinated by the Japanese or any like, or the Chinese or India, I don't know who would be fascinated by that, but like is going in and be like, okay, I'm fascinated by this culture. I'm going to go live there. I want to adapt. I want to live like them, but that's not what's happening. And then they come to countries like Canada. First of all, these people really do hate us. There's a lot of proof that the people that are coming here like hate Whitey, want to kill Whitey, erase Whitey agenda, and they're openly stating this all over online that we should be erased in different communities. The Austin Metcalf thing is a huge indication that there's, yes, certain racial groups that don't like white people say the most absurd, racist in their terms and their ideology, racist things towards people, but they're not racist because it's saying it to a white person. And then these people come in and then they essentially erode our national identity, our culture that we already have in traditions that came from European-centric traditions and cultures and traditions and all that stuff, right? And then they tell us that we don't even have a culture. Like, you never had a culture to begin with. You didn't have a Canadian culture. They literally have heritage moments on our TV. And I remember it was like growing up in the 90s and how they did institutionalize our own culture. And I've grew up with my grandparents and people like that, that you can clearly see we have our own culture, our own values, our own traditions, our own ethnic makeup of what makes us Canadian.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, you know, we're watching all of this play out in a way that, you know, I read these. Do you ever read the documents called the Toronto Protocols?
I actually bought the book. I haven't read it though. It's pretty thin, but like I just bought the book. I wanted to cover it.
This has been a big resource for me over the years because it helps clarify a lot of what's going on. So, you know, this is the records of two alleged meetings that occurred in Toronto in the 1960s and the 1980s, and is a group that called themselves the 666. So they had obvious sort of, you know, they identified in a satanic way, but they also called themselves the 666 because they saw themselves as owning and managing the 6 sort of major industries on Earth. So it was like energy production, food production. They had a whole list of the 6 industries that they dominated. And they had these 2 meetings in Toronto where they're openly stating the specific warfare strategies, operations, and tactics that they have been implementing, are implementing, and are going to implement to install a new world order. And they discussed this all at great, great length and basically showed the map of how they're going to install this new world order. For example, one of the meetings that they had was called the Red Wave. And they named that meeting the Red Wave in reference to the wave of communism they planned on bringing into the West as part of a process of demoralization and, you know, the whole demoralization of the nation, the destruction of the nation. And their whole plan is to basically bring the nation to its knees by things like mass immigration. They talk about weather, like manipulation and weather warfare. They talk about the war on the family very explicitly. This is actually one of my main sources for my docuseries Superorganism that goes into the war on the family. One of the main sources that I use is the Toronto Protocols because they're very explicit about how they're going to do this. Dude, it's really, really good. I'm going to
do an episode on it because, like, I've been meaning to, and I heard it from, do you know what Dagalon is? Like, are you aware of, like, Jeremy McKenzie stuff? Oh, Derek is the one that sent me. He's like, you need to check this out. So find this. So I got it to read it because we've covered the Protocol Elders of Zion and done, like, a big 3-hour, like, almost 4-hour live stream on it. But I decided to get the book, and it's interesting that you reference it because now I'm like, oh, I need to read that and actually maybe cover it for a show because even Trudeau's father had, that would be cool. I would definitely bring it back on I'll read it through and then maybe we can do an episode.
I've been deep into it for years. It's so good.
Dude, even Pierre Trudeau, there's a story supposed to be on his limo. It said 666. And then when an interview was like, why does your limo say this? He said, figure it out, and then drove away.
Doesn't surprise me. I mean, he's brought up very explicitly in the testimony of MK Ultra whistleblower Kathy O'Brien, right? So Kathy O'Brien's very explicit about how sick Pierre Trudeau was, how obsessed with mind control he was, that he was pretty insane about this sort of like Jesuit way of trying to make a world religion, sort of world religion as a form of mind control.
He was obsessed with communism too.
Absolutely. That family has, a lineage of admiring communism. Now, I think one of the tricky things, though, with the whole communist piece is that people don't understand the way that communism evolved and what has changed about it for it to occupy things like our schools, our government, our human rights laws, even. This is something that, I've covered a lot in my work. It's one of the things that I deal with pretty explicitly in my short documentary, Canada's Red Shadow. That was focused just on, I went to one protest here. So you remember the 1 million March for Children protests?
Yeah, yeah.
On? Okay,
so I was supposed to show up, but I didn't have time.
So I went to the Toronto version of that. I went to Queen's
That's
Park.
where I was gonna
go. So I arrived first at the counter protest before I got to the actual protest of like the parents, asking to defend their children and change the school curricula. So I arrived at the counter protest, and the counter protest was being led by active neo-Marxists. So this was a group that had pictures of Karl Marx, and they had rehearsed chants, right? So they were saying trans rights are human rights. Trans rights are workers' rights. They had all these Marxist
That's so
chants,
absurd,
right?
too, because we don't even get access to water and shelter. That's a basic human right. And there's millions of people that don't have access to that. And these people are like, let me cut off my dick, please. Like, that's so crazy.
It's what? And they were extreme. This was a really extreme group of people. So once they realized I wasn't one of their people,
idiots. Yeah,
they went totally insane on me. There was this trans person spraying my phone constantly with a bottle they had brought to try to stop you from filming anything.
Technically assault too.
They had like a noisemaker to try to kill the sound, so I couldn't make any recordings. And I was literally just trying to have conversations with these people.
Anyways, they don't want to talk. It's quite clear.
Not at all. They're not
able to have useful idiots.
I had a very, very comparatively a much better conversation with a mom there. But again, she was so ideologically subverted that she had multiple children who were like trans and bi and all this stuff.
That's sick. And those people are going to grow up and they're going to they're going to be fucked, dude.
Yes. They really will be. It's absolutely destructive. It's very, very destructive ideology. And I think one of the problems is that you have people like that mom who she has no idea that her cognition is operating according to these neo-Marxist ideologies, these new Marxist ways of seeing the world. And what's important for people to understand is that your cognition, okay, let me make it really basic. Your cognition is made up of attention, perception, memory, and thinking. Those are just like the basic parts of human cognition. So what happens is attention and perception are really the areas where they manipulate this the most. So in this new form of Marxism, it's all about identity, oppression, and power. Okay. And they claim that you have to look at the world through this lens of identity, oppression, and power. Every interaction, every business, every part of life has to be seen through this lens. So for example, in our media and in our schools, they keep bringing it back to this idea of oppressed minorities, right? So you have the patriarchy, you have all these forms of oppression, oppressing trans people. So there's gender norms that are oppressing people and like whiteness that's oppressing people, all this insanity. But what they do is they bring people's attention, like this mother and like the children who are in Canadian school classrooms right now, they keep bringing their attention to this idea of identity, power, and oppression over and over and over again. Now that's the attention piece. So if they keep training their attention into that same worldview, that same narrative, that same lens over and over again, what happens is their perception shifts. And over time, with that conditioning, and they condition people this way, then they're only able to see the world through that lens. They don't see any other way of perceiving reality itself. And from there, that's the ideological capture. And that's why people like that mom that I met at this protest, she's sacrificing her children to this neo-Marxist narrative.
Oh, yeah. It's crazy, dude.
She has no idea.
No, and it's interesting too, because like the KGB supposedly did that experiment where they like conditioned and brainwashed people for they figured out it would take 4 to 6 months to completely brainwash a person beyond the point of return, where even if they showed them contrary evidence that they're like, hey, we've been lying to you this whole time, everything that we showed you is pretty much just a fabricated lie, they didn't want to believe it. So you see this, like how long does years take, right? Even the Rockefellers buying out the education system, you see this on, because I'm very vocal and have been banned numerous times because I'm very harsh in the way I say things. I say it bluntly and say like, come on, like what is going on with you? Like these people are losing their minds. You're literally you're institutionalizing your own self-destruction, and these people don't even notice it. And look at what like COVID did to people and all that stuff, where there's people still wearing masks because of this conditioning, because it made them feel better. And these people don't even realize how they're being used by this agenda to essentially destroy themselves. And I like this analogy that I think that I coined it, but I was just talking like on a video, and I was like, people are digging their own graves, and eventually they're going to dig their own graves big enough that everybody else falls into them. And then we're all clawing at the dirt together, even though other people didn't even want to be involved with this and just wanted to raise their kids in a normal environment. But the more that the government and this neo-Marxist agenda does start influencing everybody, and we had a co-host that was gay. We didn't care. He was like the token gay guy of the show, was into conspiracy theories. He helped me keep the show alive when the guy I started the show with was busy and stuff like that. And then he went so far left that he got captured, and then he's trans now. So it's like it went so far where I saw these little changes, and then now it's like he's like not at him. He's not. It's like losing somebody, right? Because they're not the same person.
No,
and
100%.
I wanted you to get into a little bit about like what really switched your brain and got you into looking into communism and Marxism, because they're almost fed this way where they believe like it's a good thing, but once you start breaking it down to them, they don't want to admit how terrible of an ideology it is and how it led to the deaths of hundreds and millions of white Christians specifically, and people in China, everywhere, right? It's killed over 100 million people, supposedly 40 to 60 million white and even Muslim people in Russia. And I want you to kind of get into that, but I also wanted to say it is interesting just how they've really, I was going to lose my train of thought, but they've conditioned people so much, they don't even recognize it. Like, even if it was staring back in the face, it's so crazy.
There's a lot to say about this. So I'll say that, I had some awareness of the communist influence many years ago, maybe 10 years ago, when I first read the Toronto Protocols. But I really didn't grasp the nuanced evolution of communism. I really didn't properly grasp the way that communism had evolved for the West specifically until I really got deep into the research during COVID. Because during the whole COVID narrative, that's when I had a very new family, and I was making my docuseries and studying how they were attacking each member of the family. So to me, I wanted to understand it in terms of operations. What is the operation that's targeting women and mothers? What's the operation that's targeting men and fathers? And what is the operation that's targeting, children and innocents? And when I got deep into the war on children, it was very obvious to me that this neo-Marxist narrative was the absolute weapon, like the worst possible weapon they could be using on the children. And that it was very clear to me. And that's when I really started to clue into, holy shit, I see the exact form of neo-Marxism that they're using here. And actually, in my opinion, it's much more sophisticated than the old forms of communist ideological subversion, discussed by like Yuri Bezmenov, for example.
Yeah. We've played his clips in the show.
I think it's more sophisticated than what he's referring to, because what he's talking about, like, some of that is occurring, don't get me wrong, but what he's talking about is swaying people towards a politically communist way of participating in the world. What we're talking about, what we just identified, that cognitive shift, that's deeper. That's like mind control, like brainwashing
100%.
level, right? That's changing. That's why I speak about it in terms of cognition. Altering someone's cognition is a very, very deep form of manipulation, because you're altering what thoughts they can have. You're altering how they perceive every relationship, every interaction, every piece of content in the world. You can't talk to these people without
They're
them
crazy,
giving that framing.
Dude.
It's
seeing
really
it online and like how like the like posting stuff where I talk about some people, even like the Trump stuff. Holy shit, man. I don't like Trump. He's owned by Israel and all that shit. But the people they have like where they're like oh, you Trump maggot or whatever they call you, stuff like that.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm not even American. I don't even like Trump. I don't
know.
like, and it's like they're so afraid of Trump. And it's
Oh,
like this conditioning that's been done. And the thing I was thinking about too is like, not even have they like brainwashed the rest of the world to hate Whitey. And that's, I do clearly see that as a huge agenda. They've also brainwashed white people to hate themselves in that regard too, and inflict their own self-destruction upon themselves. And that's why they this whole subversion of like, even being like, black people are oppressed. They're the ones that are oppressed. They're a minority in this country, but yet there's billions of them in Africa, right? So if you wanted to go to a place where you weren't the minority, then you could easily go across the world and go to a whole continent of billions of those people, right? White people don't have that. We literally don't have that. So when you come into our countries and you're like, well, I'm the minority, I need special privileges. No, you're actually a minority in the countries that we built and founded and settled upon. Well, yeah, of course, the slave trade, but people always forget that black people sold themselves into slavery and are still doing it to this day. And that white people during the Ottoman Empire, that's where the word slave comes from, is Slavic, were enslaved at a larger number than Africans were. And they just, all they know is what they've been told, like, you're the oppressed ones, white people are bad. And then to white people, it's like, you have privilege, even though I knew no one with white privilege. Most of my friends were poor, middle class, but they're like, you had privilege because of your skin color. All of that shit, if people don't realize they're listening, watching, that comes from neo-Marxist ideologies, and to be like, pin people against each other.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, this is sort of how they did it, right? There was a slow creeping way of doing it, always adding this extreme neo-Marxist narrative to every civil rights movement that occurred throughout history, right? So this occurred like with the original civil rights movement, the neo-Marxists, like critical race theory, for example, right? This is a really, really good example. The staunch critical race theorists believe that racism got worse after the end of slavery and all these things. They believe that the whole civil rights movement was actually destructive because it hid the racism inside the systems, and it became covert racism. Yeah. Like they became like wild conspiracy theorists, to be fucking honest. But so they'll take something, you know, like a real movement where, you know, there was genuine racism, right? There were actual human rights issues in terms of racism. Some of that was a real thing that had to be addressed. And so you have these real movements, and then like a fucking parasite, they latch onto it. They say, that's not far enough. We need to go further. So you have the same thing with, you know, gay rights and the whole LGBTQ, all of that nonsense.
Look at what it changed into. It's like, I need to wave my dick around in a pride parade.
It's insane. But so they started again with original, like real forms of oppression. So historically in Toronto, they really were raiding bathhouses and beating gay men in the streets. Like it really was horrifically violent. It did not respect human rights. Some of that shit did happen. So you did need some change and evolution in our society. But again, I agree,
but do we need those? Do we need those bathhouses, you know, jerk off? Like, you know, really, like, you're like, you start to see like this Jewish, this subversion. I think it comes back to a lot of Jewish ideologies and people and rabbis and stuff like that. But like, freedom of expression, sure, but do we need that in our society? Like, then I guess you need where they can congregate.
But it gets into a whole mess because like religion was like doing weird things with people's sexuality. Like the way that religion did, like managed people's sexuality, to me, always creeped me out, because you have like all these priests, like being ultra creeps, and that the priests were like secretly gay or molesting children, and just like, oh, it's all so disgusting.
I was never religious. We left the church early, but like I've always said that Christianity on a whole, like all the Christians that I've got a lot of friends that are Christians and family, and they're always like the nicest, most genuine, trying to actually love people, but sometimes it's to the detriment of their own health and like kind of like in their own like life, because they'll be like, just gotta love this, you know, this child murdering psychopath, you know, you gotta just give him a hug and he'll feel better. It's like, no, that guy's a psychopath. Like, and I brought up the Austin Metcalf thing. It's the same thing where his son was murdered for no reason by a black kid. That's a fact. There was absolutely no reason why that kid needed to die. And then the kid that's black is all of a sudden the oppressed one. He raises like $1 million. I think it was $500,000 the last time I checked, buys a new house. And then his lawyer is like a criminal drug drug dealer. Don't even know how his lawyer became a lawyer. And then his dad is going around saying black people are oppressed and this is why this happened. Your son was murdered because of diversity. And then you're like, oh, it's fine. Like, it's because black people, and I've seen this numerous times, they're oppressed. And this happened before where another guy, his kid got killed, like stabbed by like some Somalian or something like that. And he's like, it's because they're oppressed. It's like, no, maybe there's something wrong and they need to be, if it was the reverse, that's why I'm like, if you want to be equal, then it needs to be the same way. The amount of people freaked out over George Floyd, a known drug dealer and criminal, dying from an overdose. I truly believe that's what happened. And then they built statues for him. But if it was a reverse and it was a black guy doing to that white guy, they're literally on they're on the GoFundMe and saying that all white people should die. All the stuff that they were saying on the GoFundMe is crazy, dude.
Yeah, it's pretty brutal. So I think all of this is to say that attaching this neo-Marxist narrative over the years onto these actual civil rights moments in Canada and America, this is how they slowly embedded it into our culture in pretty like radical ways, and how it eventually made its way into our human rights laws. This is one of the struggles we're really having right now in Canada. The fact that our human rights laws are so woke in and of themselves is causing absolute chaos.
It's against white people mostly. I don't like. There's no other group. That
but then also hetero, right? To be heterosexual is a very so. Actually, this is a really good example. The heterosexual piece, the oppression of heterosexuality in Canada, is a great way to talk about the uniparty problem, right? Mm-hmm. So you have across the board, every one of our parties voted into law Bill C. I think it's Bill C4, but it was originally Bill C6. This is the conversion therapy law. Okay. So the whole idea is that they put in place this law allegedly stopping conversion therapy. And they're claiming that this is stopping people from like sending their gay son to like a Bible camp to try to like pray the gay out of them and all these like things that they claim were an issue. Frankly, that wasn't actually a huge issue in Canada. There was not a mass problem with like gay children being abused towards straightness or anything like that. But what they did was they structured this law to say that it can only go one way. You can only support a child towards being trans, gay, bi. You can never, ever bring a child back in the other direction. That is illegal. Okay.
Which is fucking absurd, man.
It's insane. And it's a very carefully worded bill to make sure that this happens. So you have Pierre Poilievre, everyone, all of them supported this. Now, here's the crazy thing.
Well, he's got that lesbian Jewish rooster that is his like deputy minister or whatever.
Yeah, that's right. Who's like, who was speaking, on like Trans Day of
Trans Day, I'm like,
right. So there's ideological capture there. No, it's not really conservatism.
They're not conserving anything, especially our national identity and traditions.
I know, like it's like Pierre Poilievre would be a left-wing politician if he went to America, right?
Yeah, 100%. He's a center leftist, 100%.
Yeah. So you had that, they all voted that in unanimously. And then when it went from Bill C6 into Bill C4, they actually made the definitions even more broad and vague, which is a very specific tactic in communist history and tyranny specifically. Actually, I'll speak to that again in a moment. But so, they passed this bill. And the craziest thing about this, and this is proof to me that it's all about ideological capture. It's all about people being unable to think logically, because when Bill C6 was being proposed, you had a group called D-Trans Canada, okay? And these are the detransitioners, right? So these are the youth that were caught up in medically transitioning themselves, realized what was going on, and woke up to it, and they opposed this bill, saying, this is actually homophobic because you're transing gay, lesbian, bi kids who are growing up thinking they're different, and they're being told you're the opposite gender and you need a sex change. So even they were against this. Okay. So
who makes money off of that?
Yes. I mean, you're a pharmaceutical patient for life. Of course, that's a big part of it. So, but you even had a group of gay, lesbian, and bisexual youth standing up saying, please don't pass this. It's horribly homophobic. It's a horrible bill. Please don't. So even with that minority group, that super oppressed group standing up saying, please don't do this, it was all pushed through by every single political party in Canada, because first of all, we have a uniparty problem.
Yeah.
But secondly, we have a problem with ideological capture, which brings it back to Yuri Bezmenov and those KGB experiments where they can't think logically. They can't have facts put in front of them. But I will say that in the whole trans operation, if we look at it from that Yuri Bezmenov view, I think that the detransitioners, to an extent, some of them represent an exception to that rule. I think some of the detransitioners have actually woken up fully out of their neo-Marxist capture. People like Chloe Cole and some of these big detransitioners that are now suing, Kaiser Permanente and all these huge medical organizations and hospitals. Some of them represent, I think, examples of people who found a way to wake up out of ideological capture. Now, to get to that point, it had to be pretty horrific. So you have girls who have chopped their breasts off and they're unable to breastfeed their children.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Some of these kids are sterilized. Some of these kids will never have an orgasm in their entire life.
I think any politician that is for this, we should cut off their dicks. Like Pierre should have, literally Pierre should, if you support this, then we're going to make you go through it. You can take all these pills and these hormone pills and you can honestly, and that's why it's interesting where it's the, Pierre just wants his turn. I want my turn on the chair. That's pretty much what everything I've seen from him is he wants his turn. He'll say whatever it takes, except for real issues. But he's I'm going to deport all these people, but I want a direct flight from Amritsar, India. He will cater to any ethnic group, any people. Mostly all the politicians are catering and talking to benefiting people who aren't even Canadian at all. And will never be Canadian, because the more that they bring these people in, and obviously this is being used for an agenda, the more that it erodes what Canada is, and eventually it won't be Canada. It might say oh, this is Canada, but it's not Canada anymore. It's something new. It's a third world hellhole. Look at the UK. Look at France. Look at everywhere. Look at Ireland. My coast is in Ireland, and it's getting fucked there.
The point of all of this is to bring the nation to its knees so that the nation wants world governance. That's the long
new
game that
order.
They're playing here, right? It is totally the new world order play. This is what so in the Toronto Protocols, they specifically state that this is our plan for our new world order agenda. They lay it the fuck out.
They literally say it over and over. It's a conspiracy. It's they say it. Biden said it. Obama said it. Reagan said it. It's crazy.
And it's really, there's nothing conspiratorial about it. Okay. They want to reorder power in the world, and they want that new system of power to be global governance. That's what they want to do. So this is very easy to show people that it's already happening. Okay. Very, very easy. So for example, you have things like ESG scores. Okay. So this is environmental, social, and governance scores that companies and corporations now have to adhere to. And things like governance means you have to have oppressed minorities in positions of power in your company. So that means your company has to have a certain amount of, these minority groups in meaningful positions of power, which means
planes fall out of the sky.
Yeah. Then the company itself is subverted, but they're just trying to raise their ESG score. So the ESG system,
man. Crazy.
No, exactly. The BlackRock is exactly where I'm going with this. So the ESG system, first of all, it's embedded with these neo-Marxist narratives. Okay. So what you have is a social credit system for companies. Now, how is that social credit dictated? Well, that whole system is dictated by the United Nations, but then the United Nations is deeply influenced by NGOs and the powerful corporations that are at the top of all of this, which really brings you to BlackRock. So BlackRock is able to, through the moving of finances and pressure it can put on different companies and pressure it can create anywhere in the world, really, they're able to manipulate the market to try to force people into this neo-Marxist social credit system for businesses on a global scale. This is why Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, said we are forcing behaviors. You have to force behaviors. And at BlackRock, we're forcing behaviors. And if you don't force behaviors, then your company's going to suffer. This is literally what he said. So that is a push for global governance, right? You have the United Nations, they're the ones who create this whole scoring system for the companies. This can be influenced by BlackRock. Then you also have another example, the United Nations Agenda 2030. So in their Agenda 2030, I'll give you guys a really very clear example. They talk about something called pro-social behavior. Okay, now it sounds nice. Sounds like a good thing. But actually, pro-social behavior is to live your life with this neo-Marxist form of cognition, to see everything through the lens of power, identity, and oppression. Everything, every relationship, everything you do. So that agenda, I looked this up to make sure, because I'm always interested in seeing where this war is manifest in my local community, because I don't want to be outraged about something that I saw online that has nothing to do with what's happening here, right? Because you can see some pretty fucking disgusting and outrageous shit out there in the world, but you got to make sure that you're upset more about what's occurring in your community. So I went and checked the curricula in the Toronto District School Board, and lo and behold, it linked directly to the United Nations Agenda 2030.
Of course.
Specifically saying,
coming
right?
quick.
But now, at no point do I remember any clear voting events or any democratic process by which we chose to have the United Nations dictate how our children are raised. That is global governance.
Oh yeah,
Subverting.
the UN has been ideologically
100%.
captured, and like they even when we talked about the Kalergi plan, which is essentially the extinction of white people, you know, and I know we have fans from all around the world that are black, fucking white, from India, from everywhere around the world, right? And I'm critical of certain people's behaviors and certain countries' behaviors because I don't like that they're subverting and changing forever my cultural heritage in my country and stuff like that. But like the Kalergi plan, I really believe is a real thing. And the guy Kalergi, he was part of the heading of like creating the UN and these whole agendas that they're pushing now. And you can clearly see that it's an attack on specifically, it's everyone. They will come after everybody at some point. It's going to happen. But first they have to get rid of Whitey. And they're literally doing this all around the Western world. It's a fact. If anyone has eyes, they can see that it's happening.
I mean, 100%. And I think part of what's going on with that whole agenda is to not only create that collapse of nations so that there's this like begging for global governance, but again, it's to get everyone constantly thinking in terms of race. So I'll say this even sometimes to the extent in terms of like us pushing back. Sometimes I realize this with myself where I don't want to be thinking about race that much. Like, even though like I'm a white person and I understand that, I'll sometimes I get conditioned by some of those rabbit holes and I'm like, wait a minute, I just don't want to think about race this much. Because then I feel like some of that is like the manipulation of cognition on this deeper level. So I think a lot of this, okay, so I study this from the lens of 5th generation warfare. Okay.
No, I agree. Cause I've always said it's to cause division.
Well, and it's to create, again, a controlled battle space. So in 5th generation warfare, this is the latest form of warfare that we're living through, right? So war has evolved through generations. And so, you have the oldest forms of war, which is just like, spears, armies clashing in fields. And then warfare evolves, and it always evolves along the line of technology, okay? So every time there's a new technology, there is a rush to weaponize that technology. So that's just the way that it's always gone. So we've gotten to a point now in human history where technology has evolved so that human cognition can be influenced very, very easily, very quickly. And large groups of people can be influenced. Their cognition can be altered very effectively with things like social media. So the battlefield now in 5th generation warfare is cognitive, okay? Way more than it is kinetic. Okay, so it's much less about tanks and guns, and it's way more about cognition. So the change that happened in war that's most important for us all to know is that war, the struggle of war, stopped being about as much, it stopped being centralized around land and geography and the leadership over that. And it started becoming more about getting access to the cognition of the people. Because if you can access the cognition of the people of a nation, you can get those people to give you their nation. Instead of having to take it over. That's the whole idea. So we're
tearing down the statues, all the history, like brainwashing
burning
the
churches
to hate themselves, their ancestors. Because if there's one thing that Jeremy McKenzie always points out, and I like this, is that like if you brainwash people to believe there's nothing worth fighting for, and your country is on stolen land, like I think that concept is stupid in my opinion, and we need to get past that. It's been hundreds of years. All nations are built on conquest, and yes, treaties were broken. But it's always done at the hands of corrupt government, right? But this idea that like if you tear apart everything and brainwash brainwash people to hate themselves and their own nation and their own heritage and their own ancestors. They won't care if their country is destroyed. And the people that they're bringing in have no connection. There's not their families are not on these gravestones for hundreds of years. They just showed up yesterday, so they couldn't care less if statues get torn down, or they change street names, or change a passport, or whatever it might be. It is so true that it is a neo-Marxist agenda of subversion and changing things, and the lens and the Overton window of making it go where they want it to go.
Yeah, and that's the whole goal, right? The goal is to define the cognitive battle space. So that's the big struggle, right? They're struggling to define the battle space itself. So this is like a weird layer of warfare that like people don't really realize is going on. It's not so much that you're up against the enemy in the battle space. You're in the battle space the enemy has created. And you're operating within the rules of the battle space that they have prefabricated.
Yeah, 100%, man.
Right?
It's
so important for people to cognize this, because that really changes the game, because it means that what we want to do is start participating in the formation of the battle space itself and start to recognize, wait a minute, maybe I've been pulled into an argument that was prefabricated. Like, is this really the clearest way to see this? So, I'm obsessed with the art of free thought, of the capacity to develop free thought. So like free thought, the best definition of free thought is essentially, the philosophy that you can use logic, reason, and empiricism without the use of dogma, authority, and tradition to be able to think freely about the world. It's not that you never use dogma, authority, or tradition, but it's that those things don't think for you. Now, one of the most important parts of free thought is that word empiricism. Okay, so use logic, reason, and empiricism. So empiricism is the philosophy that our physical bodies, that our senses, our five senses, and our embodied experience is our most direct access to truth. That your body is like a truth-seeking machine, and the best way to experience truth is through the body. Now, we have a problem then, because so much of this war is operating in the digital domain, where there's all this cognitive manipulation, and people are out there just with their minds, but they're struggling with the embodied experience of the war, with the physical domain, how it's playing out in the physical domain. This is why I really try to encourage people, get hip to how this war is manifest in your community, not to the latest, most outrageous video that Libs of TikTok just posted. Okay. That might have fucking nothing to do with your community. Like, be aware. And some of that has to do with being aware in the physical domain. But I think it's important to note that this capacity for free thinking, some of it means you have to be living enough of an embodied life and not be living in these mental digital domains all the time, because that is what avails us to the enemy's ability to create these cognitive battle spaces that you could be in that battle space fighting for 10 years and it could mean fucking nothing at all,
it's so
because
true.
it was all set up.
Well, even like the deep fake technology and stuff like that, they could just like create a video in AI, or like the way that, there's that meme where it's like the guy running after the guy with the knife, and then you zoom out. It's the way the media formats it, of like this guy was chasing after this guy with the knife, but it's actually the other way around once you zoom out and actually take a look at the whole picture. And that's why I'm like, in the way we phrase things, and then when we've talked about these really controversial topics, about like one of the like most controversial thing that I've found, that even the way if you phrase it, like we did a episode about simulation theory, but we also talked about the idea of diversity and what's happening in the world, and we called it destruction through diversity. And that was essentially flagged on Spotify for it's funny because it got a ton of downloads, but they took it off the main page where people couldn't find it, just by they would still be in the podcast, but it wasn't able to be promoted through Spotify. And the only time that's ever happened before was when we covered mass immigration. I called it the Great Replacement Theory, mass immigration, or whatever, right? And that got flagged. So it's like these certain topics they legitimately don't want you to talk about. And a way I've always phrased it is like, I actually do care for everybody, and I think that China should have its own nation, and Canada should have its own nation, and Ireland should have its own nation. And this is only happening in places that white people exist, where even now there is black people or Japanese people, whatever it may be, people from different countries, different ethnicities and cultures that recognize this. Like there's that video of a guy from Japan, and he's like, I want to come to Britain and experience the British culture, not not what I see now. He's like, what happened? I wouldn't like this to happen in Japan, right? So, and they're
100%.
obviously using this to destroy the Western world first, because the third world is already a hellhole. So if they can bring everybody to the same poverty level, that's what communism is always about, is bringing people to, it's not this idea that everyone's going to be equal and we're all going to live by each other's happiness.
Sure.
That's never going to happen. It's to bring everybody to the same poverty level, and then have oligarchs, bankers, and people that really control this world dominate over us as we're all poor, struggling, and eventually leading to gulags.
That's right. I mean, you always have a Klaus Schwab at the top of these communist revolutions. You know, you always have some fucking rich piece of shit that's somehow at the top of it, just doing fine. But I think, yeah, it's a good way to look at it, because if you understand this through the lens of warfare and through the idea that you have these social engineers at the top, and that, you know, that there's this small group of psychopathic social engineers. And, I really want to point out that these are morally inverted people. Okay.
Yes.
Their morality is completely inverted, which is a difficult thing for people to recognize. Okay. It's hard to really conceptualize someone who wants to hurt children for the sake of hurting children.
That's what I was going to say. Like,
right?
the Mark Carney being connected to Epstein, people are like, no, he probably had nothing to do with that. And it's like, are you kidding? They had a whole island where they fucked and killed children. And you think that's
these are these are morally inverted people. But I think what's important to understand is that they're at the top of the social engineering. So in that sense, a lot of these immigrants, flooding Canada, they're victims of their social engineering as well. Because now that's why I'm seeing videos of people in fucking Brampton and Toronto, all these immigrant students who are like, it sucks here. I hate it. They're like, I was given this whole story about how amazing it was going to be to live here. It's bullshit.
I work with 2 Indian dudes, and they are nice, as what I've said. Like, I have friends that are of all walks of life. I grew up with Indigenous and Black friends. All this. I've had friends of all races and creeds, colors, whatever. But I kind of press them on some of these issues, I tell them about the clergy plan, stuff like this, what I think is happening in the world, why they're being brought here. I'm very open, and they start like, oh, that's weird. They start to recognize it, especially one of them that I became closer with or whatever. And he was like, what we're told is Canada's like gold. That's literally what they're told. We're gonna come here. It's an amazing place. There's gold here, like essentially that they'll live like kings and all this stuff, and it's a great society. And then it's funny because they don't recognize that their own culture and own subversion in some regard is also destroying the country that they want to come to. And then because they're not, a lot of them, because the more people you bring into the country and they don't assimilate, because there's so many, Brampton is a prime example. There's a pocket of people, they're like, oh, I'm just going to turn this into an Indian city. It's just India now, a little version of India. So they're not adapting and assimilating and wanting to leave their culture behind. They want to come here and just take over and subvert and destroy our own cultural heritage, instead of being like, okay, I need to leave these problems at home. The Sikh and Hindu fight is a big example. The Khalistani terrorist movement is a big example, because to my eyes, they're fucking terrorists. And then Jagmeet Singh has ties to them. Like, these people come here and then they bring their own problems, their own struggles, their own gang wars, all of that stuff, not leaving it behind. And that the government knows this is happening, doing it on purpose. And then you have like the Brampton, Canada candidate, which is an Indian guy, of course. And he's like, there's so much crime, there's so many problems. It's like, maybe look in the mirror at your own people and how they're essentially their culture is adapted by that. When you come from a place where the criminality is a way of life and corruption is a way of life, you have to scam people and get one over on people. And that's like morally just in a lot of those societies, where they think if you can scam people and steal money from them, like they're doing to our elderly, billions of dollars a year, then they think that's like moral. They think that's a good thing that they're able to steal from other people. And they come here and do that. And you wonder why our country is slowly turning into a third world.
Yeah, I mean, there's that recent statistic that there's now over 4,000 organized crime groups in Canada.
That's crazy.
Right?
Individual crime.
Yeah. I mean, that's massive. And of course, you can't speak about that without addressing mass immigration. You can't claim.
Yeah, like that's racist to talk about how people are killed.
You just can't. It's a reality of the situation. And, some of this is also the sort of technocratic, the psychopathic technocrat view of things, because our immigration system literally is being managed by AI.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so you have AI deciding who comes into the country in a lot of these instances. In fact, one of the terrorists that was recently arrested because he was plotting an attack in New York, and he was arrested, extradited to the US. This is someone who came into Canada underneath this AI system of immigration management.
So
So,
crazy.
you know,
And who's controlling the AI? Because a lot of Indian tech students stole their way to be able to get to that process, and then they're like, "Oh, let's flood in all of our people." That's what's happening.
I mean, the whole AI thing is like a big sloppy nightmare because on the one hand, it's a way to remove accountability, being like, well, it was the AI system. But on the other hand, like AI can be so deeply manipulated, like you're saying, they could move it in any direction that they want. It creates a huge amount of danger. But then the other side of it is like, maybe we wouldn't need an AI immigration management system if you weren't flooding the country with so many people at once. I mean, maybe you could just actually handle it using human beings. But this idea that we need like a technocracy, that it's like a need, this goes back to the World Economic Forum and all these like,
and
really
they want to use it too.
groups.
They want it to be like they want to use AI to be like solve our problems because they've let it go so out of hand. Where I do think some of the elites, these parasites, think that like, oh, AI is going to solve our problems because it will come to the conclusion that we need it to, and we won't have to really do anything.
You know, I've read some material, and I don't believe this outright. I hold a space of doubt for this, but it's possible to me. Some people have said that some of these globalists actually worship AI, that some of them are seeking to create a kind of AI singularity that they believe that can be worshipped as a kind of god. You know, I think you have probably a lot of really weird, twisted niches in these groups. Because I really don't think that all of this is one totally united group. I think we've got a lot of really disgusting, morally inverted groups across the world that are working with each other. Like there's some coordination, I think, in, you know, like I said earlier with the World Economic Forum and the UN and stuff. But really, I think a lot of the time you're dealing
the Talmudic Jews.
Well, I think some of them are competing with each other. Yeah, and you have the whole foundation of Israel and that whole thing. I mean, that's a huge mess. And, you know, you look at how polarized the debate is right now with all of that and like, you know, Murray going on the Joe Rogan podcast. And now you have Jordan Peterson chiming in and all of that.
Yeah, Jordan Peterson's such a shill, man. I'm like, what the fuck, dude? Like,
it's really him asking Joe Rogan to put up guardrails for who he platforms. I mean, I was like really just disgusted.
I didn't know he did that. That's fucking crazy, man.
Yeah, it was really creepy the way he framed it all.
Well, he's part of it. He kisses the boot of Israel, and I have a problem with all of that stuff because they're a lot of they're the ones that created communism and the neo-Marxist agenda. People don't realize that it came from Jewish. It's essentially Jewish supremacy in my view. And if you look at like who's behind transgenderism, look at the Weimar Republic and who was controlling Germany. If you look through all of this history of what was happening, it's not like all Jewish people are involved in this Kabbalist, crazy, satanic, Luciferian order or whatever, but it does go a lot back to them, the Rothschilds and the people that are really pushing for this stuff. And conveniently, they own all the lobbyist groups and they own all like, even people are like, well, they didn't influence the Mao's Cultural Revolution. I'm like, they sure did. Mao was hanging out with a guy named Israel fucking Epstein and Saul Adler, all these people that were Jewish, right? So it's like, if it starts to go back to this stuff and people don't want to point to it because then it's anti-Semitic, I'm like, no, if it was a bunch of Russian people or Muslim people that like 80% of Congress was Russians, wouldn't you think that Russia had something to do with the direction of America?
You know, there's this really, really fucked up part of this whole debate, and it's that the word Jew means more things than any other fucking word. Because Jewish could mean bloodline. It could mean like deeply religious, or it could mean like someone who's just like Jewish by name, but they're not really religious. It could mean someone who's converted. So, I mean, that word now, it means a fucking 1,000 things. So people are out there debating about, you know, some of these issues and the groups that are controlling when no one is even agreeing on which version of the word they fucking mean. There's all sorts of sloppy miscommunications going on because obviously it's like, if we're talking about this, we all know that you don't really mean like, you know, our Jewish friend from high school, like shit, you know what I mean? But we have an issue now where this word, it means way too many things. Like to me, I'm deeply annoyed that it means an ethnicity, a religion, a
yeah.
bloodline, a convert. I don't think one word should be given all of those meanings. I think that's kind of insane. So then we get to the point of like language and epistemology where there has to be an agreement upon terms for people to even discuss this, but they don't really let it get to that point. Which is
well, now they're like,
Peterson
if you
thing
say
and
the
all this,
word
right?
Jew, it's accusatory. That's what like they're framing it as, even just the word, and then they call themselves Jew, whatever. It's such a crazy blanketed term of like, and how they'll seek control if you are talking about this stuff. And I've had Adam Green on the show and Dustin Nemoys, they both debated, and it's interesting because they had this whole push for like, they believe, we're talking about gods. We'll bring this to a close very soon, but like this idea of wanting to become their own gods. And that is in like, if you want to talk about just the Zionist Talmudic people that read the Talmud, which if you read it, it's disgusting. Those people that believe that they're going to invoke these prophecies, people claim that, religious people think that all of this stuff is happening. Like there's all these end time prophecies with even the Pope dying. There's all these things that are being thrown out there. Dustin Nemoys points to like how many prophecies have been fulfilled in biblical scriptures and stuff like that. But then there's this idea where they could be manufacturing prophecies, which that's what Adam Green believes, is that they're manufacturing all these prophecies to bring about this Moshiach, their Messiah, which could be goddamn no Lucifer or some shit. Like they believe that like they need to bring back their Messiah. Jesus wasn't the real Messiah. He's boiling alive in hell or whatever, but they got to invoke their own prophecies to bring about the Moshiach, their Messiah. And you see this in Israel, and then you wonder why like Trump kissed the Western Wall. Every president has kissed the Western Wall and wear the little hat. So I'm like, people need to pay attention to that stuff more. And more than ever now, people are being like, it is weird. Why is this happening?
Yeah, I mean, we're at a very interesting point in the conversation, and I think a lot is being pushed to the surface, and I don't know where it's all going to go in terms of people like understanding, but at the heart of it, I think that you're dealing with whatever you want to call these fucking people. It's so important to recognize that they're morally inverted.
Yeah, it's evil.
That it is evil, and I think I use the term moral inversion because, first of all, because evil often gets pulled into like religious narratives, and I'm just personally not. It's never been my. I've more followed Buddhism, and some of those teachings have been more beneficial for me on a spiritual level.
Yeah, I agree.
And so I find moral inversion is like a good term to invite everybody into the conversation. I mean, what are we really talking about if we say evil? And to me, pointing out that this is, when I say evil, I mean moral inversion, which is this idea that you want the innocent to suffer. You want suffering for suffering's sake. Okay. For the sake
it's a sadomasochist point of view, right?
Yeah. Like, and
you're feeding off other people's energies, their negative energies, their emotions.
So I got to a point in all of this, I've been researching this group, this morally inverted group, for a long time. But as I said, I've gotten to this point where I really try to keep things grounded in my own life, grounded in my community. I actually got to a point, and this is where some of my latest research has landed, in researching the rise of satanic pedophile cults online. And, this is a really, I'll just touch on it briefly because I know we're at the end here, but I want to bring people back to like a sort of solution-oriented thinking. So there's only so much you can do about a group of morally inverted psychopaths living, somewhere else in the world. There's only so much you can do about that. But the moral inversion piece is important to them because they're seeking to morally invert our children. In fact, they have successfully morally inverted our children. And that's a big part of what's going on. And so I started researching this because I don't know if you follow Robbie Starbuck, but he's an influencer in the US, and one day he shared this reel, and it was a Guardian article, and it was about the FBI stumbling accidentally upon a satanic pedophile cult.
Now, Child Finders, or is that another one?
No, this is a group called the 764.
Okay, that sounds interesting.
So, he shared it as, oh, I thought this was a conspiracy theory. I thought there aren't like satanic pedophile like cults. It was a global satanic pedophile cult. Okay. So he shared this as like, in your face, of course this is happening. We're always told it's not happening. And I agree with him that there is a really fucked up bias about Satanism and pedophilia in the media. That's really creepy. However, once I looked into it, what I found was that what they were speaking to was this cult called the 764. And this is an online cult that was started by a kid named Bradley Cadenhead, who was obviously, he must have been abused or something, terribly abused. And he started watching pornography at the age of 8. And he started getting into extreme online content, eventually getting into like, trying to find live streamed suicides and murders and like all sorts of horrific shit. So by the time he was 13, he started the 764 cult, and it has exploded. Now, Cadenhead has since been arrested. He's in prison, but this group is still expanding. Now, this is a cult that there's two things to sort of know about this cult that are important in terms of this narrative that we're dealing with, like a group of satanic pedophiles at the top of the world. Okay. This group, some of them are actually children themselves. Okay. So you now have minors preying on other minors.
Just crazy, dude.
Is like pedophilia. Some of it is them. They coerce mentally ill children into committing suicide, and they live stream it. It is some of the darkest stuff you've ever seen. But the whole point
it's kind of what we do over here, though, on this show. we cover some of the most darkest stuff that you can imagine, and then we frame it in a dark comedy type of way to be like, it's fucked, but if you're not laughing, you're crying, right? So, I mean,
yeah, we have to be able to talk about it, So, okay, so we have the explosion of an online cult that is, satanic in its orientation, and it's about pedophilia, and it's about, getting children to kill themselves and hurt themselves, and some of it is also about accelerationism. And so some of these people are accelerationists, which means they are trying to accelerate the collapse of the Western world. Now, they're not politically oriented. This 764 cult, they see the left and the right wing polarization as like a beautiful, hilarious chaos. And what they do is they put out shit to try to inflame the left and the right against each other to cause chaos. There's a kid in the UK named, his name was Slain764 is his online handle. He was arrested, but he produced a manifesto, totally fake, right? But at the time it was taken as a real manifesto. And what did he do? He embedded in the manifesto a lot of the narratives you and I have been talking about today. That I did it. It was a shooting that he got arrested for. I did it to try to stop the mass immigration and all this stuff. I'm against what's happening and all. He doesn't care about that shit at all. What he wanted to do was use his arrest and all the chaos he caused to inflame the right, to get them to go after the left and be like, see, shove it in your face. When it turned out that was all fake bullshit. And he's an accelerationist who sees all the political polarization as an opportunity to accelerate the collapse of the West. Which to me, there's a lot of really good pieces of information here in terms of the war that we're in. Number one, obviously, people like this kid, Slain764, he shows us that if we become ourselves too politically polarized, then we become vulnerable to different forms of cognitive manipulation, right? So you want to use political views to an extent, but you want to be able to think freely outside of that. The other thing is that this war on innocence, this has reached our homes, our families, because this group 764 and the related cults that are surrounding them, they're operating in Minecraft servers. They're in Roblox. They're operating on Discord. They're pulling kids into Telegram groups. They are in our homes. Actually, this is happening to our children. To be honest, the CBC made an actual legitimate documentary about this group. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe the CBC actually put out something meaningful and real. But they did. You guys can look it up. It's on YouTube. The point is that there may not be a lot we can do to directly affect some of these satanic psychopaths, who are performing this globalist plan. Sometimes, that's like your 5,000 meter target. Okay. But there are satanic pedophiles who are in our homes because they have accessed our children through, the digital domain.
Yeah, 100%.
And so to me, if we are going to try to win this war, if we're going to be standing up against these things, taking a moral position, defending our children, I think it's important you got to recognize that 30-meter target. Okay. Don't get lost in the 5,000 meter target. Sometimes we want to deal with that. Sometimes. But if you're not locally dealing with the way this war is manifest, then it's going to creep into your home, into your life. So my kids are very active gamers. So I'm very careful to watch what kind of gaming culture they're into, what spaces they're entering. Like I'm very, very careful.
I would be too,
and really the thing that saves, protects them the most is my relationship with them, is that I'm an unschooling, homeschooling father. I'm with my children every day. So because we have a deep relationship, it's very unlikely that they're going to get pulled into some mental nightmare with some online creep. because we relate so closely every day. That is the primary form of
I agree.
protection. It's deeply relating to your children. But I wanted it to bring some of this back to that and back to some of the things that we really can do. And I really want people to actually know about that cult, because this is a really real and explosive thing that's happening. And they're very successful at manipulating children. So people should know about that and start to pay attention to that. And, maybe there's a way that you can be more empowered in protecting your children. Because I think sometimes people in our place, in our position of awareness, there's a demoralization that occurs because there's kind of a sense of powerlessness. I felt this way during this whole Canadian election that we're watching play out right now.
Yeah.
I felt kind of demoralized because I kept going online and I'm like, they're not even having real debates about real issues.
No.
I just can barely handle even getting into it because
I couldn't even watch it because it's all hip. It's not. They live in their own fantasy world. Politicians are parasites, and they're there to consume our time, money, and energy, right? And like, I would like to definitely get you back on the show. I actually really enjoyed this conversation. Like, I would do a whole episode breaking down that cult if you want. Like, that would be awesome. I know the fans would absolutely love stuff like that. We've covered cults in the past, but it's kind of been a bit. Like, I actually want to cover the Children of God cult. There's a bunch of them. We've done Waco and stuff like that, but I actually really enjoyed this, and I know there's so much more we can touch upon, and that's part of the thing too. The idea of like the communism is breaking down the nuclear family, right? And that's part of it. And then so like, everyone's busy working their 9 to 5, or the children are off at school being indoctrinated by the system that was bought out a long time ago by the communists. And then you have to essentially try to scrub their brains of all this brainwashing when they get home after they've been indoctrinated all day by a fucking public school system or even the religious school system. Right. So, but I really enjoyed this conversation. I definitely want to do this again. Even once I get settled with the baby, and all that stuff, and I get back in the saddle a little bit, I'd love to get in contact with you. And like, there's so many more things we could actually break down, like that cult. We could get more into the neo-Marxist agenda. I would actually be interested in talking more about like homeschooling and how you did that and stuff like that, because I've always been interested by that kind of stuff. So I appreciate you coming on, man. Yeah, man. It was awesome. I want you to let people know where to find you, where to follow you, all that good stuff. And then, for sure, for all the fans out there, we call them the hose heads, obviously, because we're Canadian, based off of Bob and Doug McKenzie type of feel to the show. So for all of them, right, like, definitely check out your stuff. And I definitely want to bring you back on, because I think the fans are really going to like this conversation.
Yeah, man, it's been great. There's so much we could talk about. I would love to come back, get into the 764 cult. We could do some stuff on the Toronto protocols.
Yes, that'd be sick. I gotta read that now.
Yeah.
Tell them where to find you.
Great. So you can check out my work at simonesler.com. So you'll be able to see my films there. I've got my Legacy Keepers project, which is really an invitation for parents to move into a more legacy keepers mindset with their children. I think legacy is one of the main things the New World Order has been attacking. Family legacy is their Achilles heel. If families can be stable over many generations and maintain a legacy of wisdom, that completely unravels everything they're fucking doing with this New World Order. So I'm very, very fascinated by that concept. I get deep into that in my docuseries Superorganism that you can see on my website as well.
That out. That sounds awesome.
I'm on X. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Telegram. So you can follow me in all of those places. And I have some new content coming out. I'm working on a new docuseries called The Moral Facade. And it's really about this. Essentially, their claim that there was systemic bigotry is their reason why they say they can impose systemic morality on us. And I'm really, unpacking the way they're trying to impose this moral facade onto everyone and make morality something that's managed by the government and the financial system. So I'm working on that. Some of it's going to be in response to whatever happens to this election that we're on the edge of.
Yeah, we're heading down a dark road, I feel like.
I have it could be really bad, but whatever. I'll make something in response to it to enlighten people towards free thinking either way. So you can check out all my stuff at simonesler.com and look forward to connecting with some of you.
Yeah, that's awesome. I would love to talk. They're going to try to control everything we do, think, say, believe. They're already attempting to do it constantly. So the more people actually go out of their way to push back against this and to freely think the way that you want, not the way that you've been conditioned to, but actually do, like, my whole philosophy is question everything, even my own beliefs and stuff like that, right? So I really enjoyed this. We're definitely going to have you back on the show. And everybody out there, stay strange, support the show, give us 5-star rating, reviews. We're working on new merch designs for the website. All the stuff should be in the link tree. I will get even if you have a link tree or some links to your stuff, we'll put in the bottom of the description, and then everyone can know where to find everything. It's very easy. So we appreciate you, appreciate your support. And yeah, everybody stay strange out there.